On today's show, a special treat for your weekend, looking back at and grading the legend that was Jurickson Profar in 2024, going over all the great things that happened for him, the things that were unexpected, what made him such a breakout star this year, going over some of the bad, and whether or not the Padres should re-sign him this offseason. So, important episode. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Friday, December 6th. That's right, almost at the end of the year, folks. As always, I'm your host with sometimes occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can find me on Twitter/X at Javapeno, as well as Blue Sky. And you can also check out the show account for the Twitter on Twitter/X at LO_Padres. And also be sure to go check out Just Baseball, a company that I work with. And I work on the newsletter. I recently wrote a piece on Anthony Santander, and I'm bringing my podcast over there back soon. Hopefully by the end of the year. We'll see how that all goes. If you want all my other non-Padres work and what have you. Today's episode, guys, is brought to you by PrizePicks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. I almost started coughing in the middle of that. That's right, folks. I'm right on the outside, right? Like I'm right there, but sometimes it rears back just a little bit. But it's okay. We keep thriving. We keep going no matter what. And speaking of keep going no matter what, we are talking about a player who had been surviving in Major League Baseball. It's almost in a way a little bit surprising that he did last in Major League Baseball this long to get to the point where he would be in the league for so long and finally have a breakout season. And, you know, just considering that he'd been so disappointed at this point, and that's Jurickson Profar. So we're doing a player review today, as well as talking a little bit about my thoughts on whether or not they should re-sign him, which I think is the biggest question that everybody's wondering about. But first, let's get into the good of all Jurickson Profar this year, to which there was basically an endless dripping of good throughout the whole year that we all salivated over, and it was awesome. And I think that's where, like, look, when you talk about Profar, you have to start with the fact that this is a player that we don't really have a precedent for what Jurickson Profar did this year, right? So part of me is like about to, you know, I guess some people might even use that as a negative for going forward, and we'll get to that at the end of the show. But for me, it's just you basically only have a couple of players. Like R.A. Dickey, when he won a Cy Young, I think at age like 34 and had never been that good. And he was also never that good ever again. Or, you know, maybe Jose Bautista, I think is usually one of the most popular picks when people talk about players that figured it out later. David Ortiz a little bit, but especially Jose Bautista, who just made some mechanical changes and started pulling the ball more and then became that genuine superstar slugger for like 6 or so years and whatnot, right? With Jurickson Profar, I'm not necessarily saying that this is Jose Bautista, but what he did this year was incredible, simply put, right? Jurickson Profar this year, he had a slash line of 280, 380, 459, and a WRC plus of 139. He hit 24 home runs, a career high. His previous career high was 20 back with the Texas Rangers and the Oakland A's. It was actually 2 back-to-back years. So maybe it wasn't like shocking that he survived at MLB because he had at least some success, even if it paled in comparison to what everyone was expecting. And basically, what everyone was expecting was a little bit similar to this year, which was a player that kind of knew how to just put together good at-bats. And in fairness to Jurickson Profar, for all the naysayers, that has never changed. Jurickson Profar, if there's one thing that kept him in the league, it is his walk rate, right? This guy has a career walk rate of 10%. This year it was 11.4%. He's always been able to put together really solid at-bats, and I think that that's just kind of something that's always appreciated in Major League Baseball. Someone that you know is going to go up there, see a couple pitches, maybe draw a walk, you know what I mean? Be a little bit of a pest, foul off some pitches. And that's what he did this year more than ever, right? You had a couple of walk-offs home runs this year where he actually like fouled off a bunch of pitches. It was a long at bat and whatnot. And I think that with Jurickson Profar this year, it's just so unbelievable the things that he got better in, right? This year, when you look at the StatCast profile, you know, when it comes to chase percentage, whiff rate, strikeout percentage, walk rate, those are all in the 88th percentile or higher. But that's not like crazy unexpected. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't always this great, right? But last year, if you look at 2023, even when he was bad, he was still in the 74th percentile of chase rate, 79th percentile of whiff rate, strikeout rate. He was in the 80th percentile. He's always been a guy that's been able to draw walks, so I'm not surprised by that. But what was surprising was how much Jurickson Profar was able to just consistently hit this year. 20 home runs, like I said, he had done that before, so 24 is not like the craziest thing in the world, but the fact that he actually had a higher batting average, by far, like the best batting average he's basically ever had in his career with 280, he was just a guy that was a genuine force in this Padres lineup. And what was so great is he was like guys, they had this guy batting cleanup sometimes. You know what I mean? Like, he was a cleanup hitter for this team, especially early on in the year when you saw that Manny Machado was really struggling. He actually batted third and second. He batted, so he didn't bat cleanup. I'm sorry. He batted third in the order a lot. And that's pretty wild considering the players on this team, from Fernando Tatis Jr. to Xander Bogaerts to Manny Machado. It's pretty wild that we found ourselves in a situation where Profar was the third guy sometimes, or even the second guy. He even batted sixth a couple times. And I think that what was so fun about him this year is that he was also consistently great throughout the entire year, right? This wasn't a player who had like a first half sort of situation, right? And don't get me wrong, some people will bring up, oh, well, he fell off in the second half. He did a little bit, but in general, first half, he had a 148 WRC plus, second half, 126. If you don't like those numbers and you want to go more standard, he had an OPS of, of 870 in the first half and 794 in the second half. Those are still solid numbers. 794 is still a good OPS, especially, by the way, which is the most fun part about Jurickson Profar this year. This was a player who they signed for $1 million, the absolute minimum that you could get for a player, and it was done late. And I still remember when, just to show you how like unpredictable baseball can be, I remember when the conversation was about like, the Padres have no outfielders. You know what I mean? We're trusting a rookie at Jackson Barrel to man center field, which everybody go feel free to check out my episode player review I did on him a couple weeks ago, that we had him, and then you were like, okay, you have him and Tatis, but one of them is uncertain because he's a rookie, and then we don't know what's going on in left field. We're like, is it Jose Azocar? And then they end up not signing Tommy Pham, who a lot of people expected that they were going to go after, and they didn't, just because you figured they needed someone. And they signed Jurickson Profar for 1 year, $1 million. So in terms of just in a vacuum, it's one of the greatest bargains for a player that I've ever seen. 4.3 wins above replacement for $1 million is the stuff of dreams, ladies and gentlemen. This is the type of stuff that the Rays would get away with, right? A 139 WRC plus when his previous career high was 113, which was in 2020, by the way. And his best in a full season was 110. So basically what I'm saying is what Jurickson Profar did here was absolutely outstanding. And it wasn't totally a fluke, right? I think that one of the common things that people will bring up with Jurickson Profar is pretty simple, which is, well, this guy's Cody Bellinger, right? And Cody Bellinger last year was absolutely phenomenal, right? This was a player that, had been really dreadful for a long time, right? So there's some narrative similarities, right? Cody Bellinger, formerly like a rookie of the year and an MVP. So you might be even more worried. It's like, oh my God, Bellinger season in 2023 when he had a 4.4 wins above replacement, he knocked 26 home runs, he had a 136 WRC plus. That turned out to be a bit of a fluke, but that guy at least had a resume before this. Profar doesn't. So what's the difference? Well, the one difference is that Cody Bellinger had one of the greatest discrepancies in his weighted on base and expected weighted on base, which tracks like the value of hits outside of just, because batting average only tracks, basically, to simplify it for you guys, for those who don't know, it simplifies and treats every hit as the same, while weighted on base does not do that necessarily, right? So that's what's really good about it. Provides more value. His weighted on base in 2023 was 370. His expected was 327. That is one of the crazier discrepancies I've seen. And add on to the fact that his hard hit rate that year, I'm talking about Cody Bellinger, his hard hit rate, he was in the 10th percentile at 31.4%. Like, he wasn't good. Now you look at Jurickson Profar. So for people who are worried that this is just Cody Bellinger 2.0, his expected weighted on base was 364 this year compared to his 365 that he ended with. And Jurickson Profar's hard hit rate was actually in the 71st percentile, which tells me maybe that second half is a little bit real, right? But that second half of a 129 WRC plus, you will take that every day of the week. That's still very, very, very good, right? And I think that that's what's so fun about Jurickson Profar is I think that it's so unprecedented that nobody knows how to kind of view it. But at least in terms of the like initial, like, surface level, the easy stats that a dummy like me understands, there isn't that immediate warning sign the way that there usually is for players like this. And that's what made Jurickson Profar season so amazing, among other things, which we're going to get to in just a second, guys. But first, I must talk to you about one of our sponsors, one of our lovely, lovely sponsors of the show, and that is Hims. And this is about sexual health, guys, so I'm going to be serious for a second. When it comes to intimate times that you have in the bedroom, you want to be prepared, you want to be set, you want to be healthy, and Hims is a good place for that. You don't necessarily have time to go to a doctor's office to get treated for erectile dysfunction, ED, and through Hims, you can get a personalized ED treatment without stepping foot outside your door. It's changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. Hims provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints and Viagra and Cialis and their generics up to 95% cheaper. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for uncomfortable doctor's visits. You just answer a series of questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. If prescribed, your medication ships directly to you in discreet packaging for free. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. With hundreds of thousands of subscribers, Hims can help you find the ED option that works for you. Start your online visit for free today at hims.com/lockedon. That's Hims, HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. Just a little bit of disclaimer, guys. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See the website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Prices vary based on product and subscription plans. But again, that's hims.com, HIMS/lockedon. And just like that, everybody, we are thriving and vibing on this episode for this lovely, lovely Friday. I hope you're all having a stupendous, stupendous day and hopefully a stupendous weekend. And I'm trying to give you good vibes talking about one of our favorite players of this year. So yeah, when it comes to Jurickson Profar season, it's just really nice that there were things other than what you saw with Cody Bellinger that he did well, right? His expected batting average was in the 92nd percentile. His expected weighted on base, 92nd percentile. His barrel rate, 43rd percentile. So not the best, but it's still an improvement from many years before. For example, in 2023, you know where his barrel rate was? He was in the 10th percentile. And in 2022, he was in the 14th percentile. So like, that's like okay. And again, the biggest thing to me, I've always said this on this podcast, my number one advanced stat for beginners to always look at is hard hit rate. And he was in the 71st percentile for that. And on top of that, I think the thing outside the numbers for Jurickson Profar that made him so memorable this year is the vibes and the moments. Whether it be game-tying home runs against the Diamondbacks, whether it be, remember the that series against the Dodgers when Will Smith was talking smack? He was saying, "You're irrelevant. You're nothing. You're nothing." Like Lee says in the Bear episode. People who watch the Bear know what I'm talking about. And what does he do? He hits a bases clearing double that ends up winning the Padres the game on national TV on ESPN. And then you had the situation with the Nationals, right? This guy was continually, every time someone messed with him, either he or the rest of the team, which was where the vibe curation came from, I think. It was just amazing. It would always start with him, just this irritant for people for some reason, right? Hey, even the catch that he made in the playoffs that I've gotten comments on for the last month about how he taunted the fans, so he deserved to have things thrown at him, and his teammate to have beer thrown at him. Like, that's deserved, because fans are really innocent creatures and you can't say anything to them. But even that big moment there, the series against the Nationals, when, God forbid, he was hyped up, maybe talking a little bit of smack, maybe towards the direction of the Nationals dugout, because they intentionally walked Luis Ariz in order to face him. And what does he do? He makes them pay, wins them the game. And then the next day, catcher, worst qualified catcher in the league, by the way, Keibert Ruiz, gets in front of his face and all this stuff. Then Profar gets hit, of course, by Mackenzie Gore. Machado hits the home run. And then later that game, what happens? Jurickson Profar hits a grand slam. He was just incredible with the moments, and especially in the clutch. And you got to appreciate that. It's not necessarily the most replicated thing, but we're talking about this year. And in terms of this year, Jurickson Profar in high leverage situations, he was rocking a 327 WRC plus. That is almost 40. No, it is. It's 43 points higher than the second biggest person, which was Joey Bart, who, by the way, he had half as many high leverage appearances as Jurickson Profar did, 61, and then Joey Bart had 34. Fernando Tatis Jr., who had 38 appearances, who was third in WRC plus in high leverage, and then Juan Soto with 49. Basically, what I'm saying is when you look at the WRC plus leaderboard in high leverage situations, Jurickson Profar found himself in so many and still ended up being the best in that regard. That's a plus. Right? Because usually if you would be in more situations, he should be a little bit more normal, right? Like a little bit more in the, 200 range for being clutch. And also, by the way, reflection on how great this Padres season was, that they have 3 players in the top 20 WRC plus in high leverage situations. Profar, the aforementioned Tatis, and Jackson Merrill, who, if you're curious, was 17th. If you want to just look at in scoring position, he's not quite as high up, but he was still very, very good this year. In terms of runners in scoring position, which was obviously a giant thing for the Padres last year, he also was very, very effective this year. In terms of WRC+, he finished 23rd among all players with 165, so he was still good there. He wasn't on the Aaron Judge, Juan Soto level, but remember, part of that is because Aaron Judge and Juan Soto were hitting home runs left and right, by the way. You know what I'm saying? So that inflates some of it, but just in general, absolutely outstandingly clutch season for Jurickson Profar. But now, unfortunately, we got to get into a little bit of the bad, folks. And good news, I don't think that there's too much that was necessarily bad about Jurickson Profar. The bad, I think the first thing that will come to mind, because it was the most recent thing, unfortunately for Jurickson Profar, it was the fact that he did not play very good defense. And this is something that's kind of always been a thing for him, don't get me wrong, but it's still disappointing. It wasn't as disastrous in 2024 as it was last year, but that's not saying much, because last year with the Rockies, he was minus 11 in defensive runs saved and minus 13 in outs above average. His UZR, ultimate zone rating, if you want to go by that, was also pretty bad. Let me check what it was in 2023. It was minus 2.5. This year it was minus 2.1, and then in defensive runs saved, minus 8, and outs above average, minus 6. So he wasn't like worst defender in the league, but he was still pretty bad, and it's unfortunate. I know some people might be thinking, but I've seen Profar play well. He played with us well in the outfield. That's true. He did have 2 defensive runs saved in 2022 with the Padres. Like that's pretty good. But I think that what happened with Profar is that solid defensive season he had out there, I don't think it's impossible that he returns to that he just cleans it up a little bit, right? I don't think it's impossible, but 2 years in a row of bad defense kind of is foreboding of the future. I think that in general, I think that the 1 year, that 2022 season, a lot of it was that he just threw out so many runners, right? And I've noticed that when it comes to some defensive advanced stats, when you throw out so many runners, it might inflate your thing, right? Tatis, I still think, has the athleticism to cover in terms of range, so it's not just about throwing runners out. But I think that's one thing that happened this year is Tatis didn't throw nearly as many runners out. And I think that's why the Platinum Glove stuff didn't replicate to 2024, is because I think maybe teams learned, not to test that arm of his. And Jurickson Profar, maybe they learned, all right, he doesn't necessarily have the best arm in the world. It's a pretty good arm, but let's just not test him on it. And it didn't give him as many of those things to maybe inflate that stat a little bit. Profar, I don't think is necessarily as bad as like a Juan Soto, where he makes giant like back-breaking errors where he looks like a tree just crawled out onto the outfield and can't really play there. But the range is really bad. He does not have the best reaction time. So the defense is still a negative, for sure. And that's one of the reasons why he wasn't like one of the top WAR leaders this year, is because the defense isn't good. He looks like he's a little bit more of a one note player in the sense that he's good offensively. Now, don't get me wrong, he ain't the only one, but it also is something to think about looking forward, that if he's going to be that much of a liability on defense, that could become a problem, right? Because then it means you really need him to keep up his stellar offensive discovery, I guess to call it, if you wanted to keep it up, right? So that's just me. I could be dead wrong about that, but that's just how I feel right now. The other thing being, do you worry a little bit about how much of Profar's season going forward was inflated just by those unbelievably good clutch numbers, right? Because usually you look at some of that, it doesn't always replicate. I think he could still be a good player, don't get me wrong, and he's the type of player, because of what we talked about in the first segment, with the fact that he always puts together a solid at-bat, and he's not too aggressive, right? That's really great. It's possible that maybe he'll be down just a little bit. But if he's a 3-win player next year, that's still pretty good. And also, I think he has something that you can't necessarily measure, and that's the vibes, man. But the last bad thing would just be not a good playoff stretch for our guy. Just was not good in the postseason. Look, it's one of those things where you can't really blame him. Like I said, 327 in high leverage situations. Like, you can't really get mad at the guy that he wasn't amazing in the postseason, just because he kind of was one of the reasons that they were even in the postseason, right? But this year, batted 143 in the wild card series and batted 222 in the NLDS against the Dodgers. He did have a 333 on base, which was nice, but he really just didn't have any major moments outside the home run robbery. He just wasn't all that great, right? Granted, he wasn't the only player. Let's be very clear. There are superstars on this team that did not show up in that series against the Dodgers. Manny Machado, Jake Cronenworth, Xander Bogaerts especially. Still plenty of players that didn't show up. So you can't put it all on Profar, because at least Profar in the regular season, like, it's almost should have been expected that he wasn't going to just, for an entire calendar year postseason, throughout the playoffs into a World Series, just always come through in high leverage and runners in scoring position. But that's it for the negatives, guys. Now I want to talk about the contract and whether or not the Padres should re-sign him, because I think it is one of the bigger questions in the offseason. I think a lot of people expect him to, and there's good reason for that, which I'm going to get to in just a minute, guys. But first, we must discuss one more sponsor of the show, and it is a little bit more of a fun one, dare I say, I guess, depending on interpretation. But let me tell you, we're talking about PrizePicks. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you. The thing about PrizePicks, it's got all the stuff you can need, and it is over 10 million members and billions of dollars awarded in winnings for you. You just have to pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. If you want to go over on Justin Jefferson receiving yards this weekend, I'm feeling that, because the Vikings need wins. If you want to go over on AJ Brown receiving yards, if you want to go under on frankly, any Chargers offensive thing, depending on who plays in that game, because they might not have their starting running back or their best receiver, and their other receivers stink. Whatever you want, PrizePicks got you covered with all sorts of great, promotions and whatnot. If you sign up today, you can get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to get that bonus. And they also offer other weekly promotions like Taco Tuesday, where each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. So, what in the heckity-doo-dah are you waiting for? Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. And just like that, we're back. Thriving and vibing. Final segment of this Padres player review. Let's talk about whether or not the Padres should re-sign Jurickson Profar. My initial reaction to this is 2 things. I don't think it's, first of all, in terms of just the base question, should they re-sign him? I do think so. And I'm someone who is very much a proponent of, like, I've been saying for a decent amount this offseason that I do genuinely believe, like, hey, the Padres have the superstars. You've got your Tatis, you've got your Manny, you've got your, hopefully, Bogaerts, you've got your Kings. Like, you have a lot of high price players on this team that hopefully should be stars. Hey, there's a chance that Tatis puts up an 8-win season next year, right? Like, that's the type of potential that he has, to the point where he'll make up for any of the other deficiencies in the lineup, or at least make up for a lot of the deficiencies or any regression that we might expect. But remember that, how did we get here, right? We got here because the Padres took a chance on Jurickson Profar for nothing, Donovan Solano for nothing. They got Higashioka in a trade. Like, there were very small additions that they made to round out the roster. You don't necessarily need to go big bargain bin hunting, but I don't think Jurickson Profar is going to go for that much. And that's according to basically everybody. If you go to The Athletic, they're predicting Profar to go for about 3 years, $48 million. If you go to Fangraphs, they're predicting basically the same thing, 3 years, $45 million. On the low end, maybe a 2-year, $43 million contract, maybe an option in there for a 3rd year, something like that. I could see that happening. I think that with Profar, that just seems like a pretty decent deal, right? That's not like the most insane contract I've ever heard of in my life, right? Like, I just think that overall, if you're going to pay $15 million average annual value for 3 years, it's just not that crippling, right? And especially for a team where you're worried about the increase in salary for your Tatis, for your Manny Machados, and some of these guys that are going to get more expensive and hurt your payroll flexibility for the future years. I think that would be a good plus, to just get a guy that, even if the regression happens, right? Even if he is not a 143, again, and that's a lot, right? If he's not a 139 WRC plus guy, if he just does what he did in the second half, right? If he does that and maybe gets a little bit better defensively, which I think that defense, I think defense, it's known whether or not you're going to be a plus defender. I don't think it's known whether or not you can just go from a liability to just be okay. I don't think that that's always easy to track. So if he could just be like what he was in 2022 or in previous years where he's just a little bit below average, but he's not killing you, make up for that, I could see him turning in another 4-win season. Seriously, I think that that's what he could do. Again, in the second half last year, Jurickson Profar was fine. I must mention that. 305 batting average. He did hit 243 in the second half, but he still drew a lot of walks and did get hits when they mattered. 148 WRC plus compared to 126. I just think that that's okay. I really do, and I think that that's a decent player to bet on. Again, especially considering that there were things that he showed this year, right? There was a great article back during the middle of the season that ended up staying kind of true, where it was like, yeah, some of these things are going to go down, but you can't fake certain things like hard hit rate. You can't fake it for that long, right? You just can't. Cody Bellinger being a good example. And one of the things that the article did for my video listeners, I'm going to put up the graphic, it showcased that Profar actually did make some mechanical changes from both the left and right side. He added a little bit more of a leg kick. And then in general, his stance was a lot wider from 2023 to 2024. So when you see things like that, instead of just, wow, Bellinger just happened to hit a lot of home runs at the right time, then it gives you some hope that maybe the Padres are figuring something out. And maybe there's just something with him in San Diego that he's figured out. Now, don't get me wrong. This isn't the first time that there's been a player who changed their batting stance a little bit and then had one great year. And then after that, it was like, oh, no, never mind. People adjusted. But I think that it backs up the hard hit stuff. The fact that he had a wider stance combined with his great plate discipline, that's how he was able to drive the ball a lot better than before, where he would get caught flat-footed and just swing through pitches sometimes, right? And just not be able to hit for nearly as much power. Giving him a wider berth and a bigger leg kick, I just don't think that that's a coincidence, right? That Profar was able to do all those things. And again, I recommend everyone should go check out. Just click on Fangraphs, click on his player profile, and go to recent articles. You'll find it. It's about, we need to discuss Jurickson Profar, is basically the article from my friend Davey Andrews, who I know, great guy. So for me, I just think that this could be kind of a win-win. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of free agents out there. There are, right? Everybody knows this. And for me, yeah, would I be upset if my dream boy, Mr. Michael Conforto, was made a Padre? Yes, I would be upset. That would actually be... Look, I'll defend Michael Conforto until the day I die. I still think that guy has a good season in him. But, there's some other players out there I understand. Max Kepler is one that's out there. I understand that. And frankly, yes, I love the idea of the Padres taking a shot on like Tyler O'Neill, who is projected to go for basically not all that much, right? Now, the downside for him, I do think, is pretty high, because he strikes out a lot. He doesn't always stay healthy, but 3 years, 45 for him, it wouldn't be the worst thing I've ever heard. So if Profar for some reason doesn't sign with the Padres, that's what I would like to see them do. Because again, at least with Tyler O'Neill, you have the fact that dude, when right, has been absolutely outstanding, right? And it would be basically for the same amount of money that you're paying for Profar, with possibly even a higher upside. Because this guy's put together a 5-win season before, and last year he was putting up a 2.5-win season, and he only played 113 games. And he hit 25 home runs in he hit 31 home runs in 113 games. And also very important, he's been, the problem with him, he's been Jekyll, Mr. Hyde his whole career, where like you just don't know what version you're getting of him. While Profar, I think there's a little bit more of a safety net that you think he's at least going to be productive and won't be just a total liability. But I do think it's worth talking about that Tyler O'Neill, he's won 2 Gold Gloves before, guys. This guy's been awesome defensively before. In left field, specifically, where Profar plays, 11 defensive runs saved, 4 outs above average in 2021. That's pretty damn good. That's pretty damn good, man. Like, he's had really good defensive seasons. Same thing for the year before, by the way, with the Cardinals. So I'm just saying, I don't think it's the be-all and end-all if the Padres don't get Profar, but I do think that they shouldn't be going for some of these top-tier options, right? They're not going to be able to go for a Teoscar Hernandez. I am really against Anthony Santander. I know people like him, and don't get me wrong, there's the chance that he does go out and hit 35 home runs next year and is awesome. But what I don't like about Santander is that he's going to cost... They're expecting about 5 years, 105. So that's a higher AAV, considering the Padres need to be a little bit careful with their payroll flexibility and what have you. And it's a player that has never shown the ability to get good on base and overall batting average and just hit the ball consistently, that worries me. You know what I mean? That means that if the power goes away, which it probably will, he's probably not hitting 44 home runs again. If the power goes away, guys, he could hit 30 home runs next year and be worth like 1 win above replacement or lower. That's what we're looking at here, because he also doesn't add too much defensively. So that's just me. I am pro re-signing Jurickson Profar for nothing more than just it's a great vibe. But I also wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't. There were early reports in the offseason that said that it might be unlikely. And if that were to happen, then yeah, I'm pivoting to a Tyler O'Neill. And I'm frankly pretty excited about it. So that's kind of where I stand. I really want Jurickson Profar because him and Dylan Cease, as I talked about in the mailbag on Monday, are my current favorite Padres. But it's not the end of the world. I don't think that you have to freak out if they aren't getting Jurickson Profar, especially because you have Tatis and the ascension of Jackson Merrill has been amazing, right? So I just don't think that you're in a dead zone situation. I think that you can get at least something there. And more importantly, I think the Padres need pitching, right? I'm not worried about the bullpen, but starting pitching. If you had to splash on something, I would prefer splashing on starting pitching, because I do believe that you can still get some of the top tier players on this team to produce. And yeah, that's just kind of where I'm at, guys. So let me know what you think in the comments, and feel free to leave any comments, any questions. And frankly, I don't even care, since it's the offseason, if it's not about baseball. Leave your comments below in the YouTube comment section. DM me on Twitter at Javapeno or at Javapeno on Blue Sky. Whatever one you want. It's all good, whatever you want, because Monday we will be doing a mailbag. It is expected, reported by Jeff Passan, that we might get a Juan Soto contract decision this weekend. So that will obviously be one of the things we talk about on Monday. But feel free to ask me any of your questions. We're going to get into it. Talk to me about Profar. Would love to hear back from you guys, especially because I don't think this video will elicit the Dodgers mob. I don't think it will, right? Usually it doesn't. So my comment section should actually be a lot more like easy to filter out. So anyway, whatever you guys want to ask me, feel free to do that. In terms of future episodes for the show, I'm going to probably load up some episodes in the bank, just doing more player reviews. We're going to be talking about Michael King, Dylan Cease, and with Dylan Cease, I want to discuss, should they trade him? That's right. We're going to talk about that, guys, because I actually think that it wouldn't be the craziest idea ever. And let me know also if you think that he should be traded. Also going to be doing a big video on just reviewing the entire Padres bullpen, a bullpen that I think should not be underestimated at all next year, because I think it could actually be even better than it was this year, because I think that Tanner Scott leaving, they'll be fine. I really, really do. So that's what we're looking forward to. Crossover with Locked On Angels possibly next week as well. Maybe a big Padres signing, maybe Roki Sasaki. Cross your fingers. We'll have to see. But until that next time, stay safe, and of course, stay faithful. My Friar Faithful homies, take care.